Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill, the state of the program for the Oregon Ducks. And this one is kind of a wild one to talk about. I feel like I'm going crazy because I open up the message boards, I open up Twitter, and granted, it's a lot of opposing fan bases that are putting these narratives out into the ether. This program under Dan Lanning is so clearly going in the right direction from a multitude of different spots. One, they are clearly getting better as a football team every single year Dan Lanning has been here. The talent acquisition, both on the high school trail and transfer portal, clearly going in the right direction. I think he's put a very strong coaching staff around him as well. That game against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, where Oregon clearly played their worst football of the season in that 2024 year, and all of a sudden, you got people thinking that this program's not going in the right direction. Well, let's talk about it. Let's go evaluate where this program sits going into 2025. I got some takes I want to get off my chest now before we get into it. As always, Oregon fans, opposing college football fans, let it fly in the comment section. Look, these state of the program episodes, they're really fun to do because you can have a lot of different opinions on it. So would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. The support during the offseason, as we've talked the recruiting trail, transfer portal, doing some of these state of the program episodes, it's been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Now, Dill, getting into this, right? When you want to evaluate a coaching staff, when you want to evaluate a head coach or a program, you first start on the field because that's where you get evaluated at the end of the day, right? If the wins and losses aren't looking good, you're probably not going to have a job anytime soon. Let's start there. But I think a lot of college football fans know that when you're evaluating a program, yes, wins and losses matter, but there's a lot of other conversations that have to happen, right? What's the coaching staff look like? What's the player development look like? What's the talent acquisition look like? We're going to get into that. Let's start on the field here with Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. How would you grade Dan Lanning out in his first 3 years running this Oregon Ducks program?
I mean, it's hard to really poke holes in the on-field play. And obviously, the thing that you keep hearing coming up is, can he win the big one? Lost to Washington twice in 2023,
Yep.
lost to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl in 24.
Yeah.
But you look, I mean, they beat Ohio State. They beat Penn State in the play. Like, they were, or the Big Ten championship, I should say. Like, those are big games. I don't know, like, yeah, it wasn't the Rose Bowl. It wasn't the biggest game, if you will. But that Big Ten title game, huge game. That Ohio State game, huge game. You just look like, again, he's only into his third year. I don't really have that big of questions about what they're doing.
Here's my take on that is look at every other head coach that has won a national championship that is thought of as one of the best head coaches in the country. Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Ryan Day is another example of this. Like Kirby Smart, the narrative was the same around Kirby Smart when he started his tenure at Georgia too. Can't win the SEC championship, can't beat Bama. And then you look at Ryan Day, not only that narrative about beating Michigan, but Ryan Day always had national championship caliber teams. They fell short the first couple of years. Ryan Day was at the program as well. Winning the big one, so to speak, is about putting yourself in that position as many times as you can. It's going to come, but it's probably not going to come the first couple of times you get there. And so I look at it and say, yeah, it's frustrating that you lost both those games to Washington when you probably could have won one of those games. It's frustrating that you played your worst game against Ohio State when we know for a dang fact that you could have beaten them because you beat them 2 months ago. The big games haven't come yet. My take is we've seen this with just about every single elite head coach we've seen in the sport the last 20 years. There's zero doubt in my mind Dan Lanning is going to continue to put this program in that spot to win the big one, and eventually it's going to come. That's kind of my take on the on-field play. Talent acquisition, I think, is the next thing that you want to talk about with Oregon. This is one of those programs. I'm going to get this banner out of the way because I got a couple other things I want to talk about. The thing that I love most about talent acquisition for Oregon that you see on the screen is getting better, right? 16th when he took over, 9th, 4th, 3rd. He is clearly recruiting the high school ranks at an adequate level to be national championship caliber. But they're blending it with additions in the transfer portal that not only are really good players, but players that Oregon needed for a fact. A guy like Dylan Tiemann, both starting tackles you brought in through the transfer portal. There's, at least in my opinion, there's not many programs that are balancing recruiting the high school ranks recruiting the transfer portal as well as what the Oregon Ducks are doing under Dan Lanning.
And probably the only issue is kind of what you have. You don't feel like yet the offensive line recruiting has been what it needs to be, because it does feel like they've relied too much on the portal. Obviously, bringing guys like Cornelius, bringing a couple guys in the interior as well. It looks like they're going to run 2 starting tackles from the transfer portal again in 25. That's probably the one area you'll look
Yeah,
at
agreed with
that
that.
has to catch up to everything else, because you look the defensive line, like they have a really
That's
loaded
getting
group.
there.
Starting to see those young guys
And
play better.
sorry to cut you off, but like that narrative, oh, he relies on the train. Look, he's only been here for 3 years. Like, you have to stack classes before you want your roster where it is. I would actually probably expect the transfer portal usage for Oregon to probably go down over the next couple of years, because they're getting their guys from the high school ranks. Why they were so aggressive in the transfer portal early in Dan's tenure is, hey, we got some problems with this roster that we want to immediately fix so we can compete for Big Ten championships and national championships. The
That
last
is the fair part. Like, people argue, complain, like he's used the portal to fast track this team to
yes,
national title contention much quicker than you see a lot of like fourth year head coaches
yeah,
kind of at. Like, you look at teams like Florida or even South Carolina, like they're building their way up, but they are taking longer than what it seems like Oregon's taking. And again, part of that is using the portal to bring in really high level guys to kind of make things run a little quicker. But I'd be a lot more concerned if I saw those high school recruiting rankings like 15th consistently.
yes, agreed. And it continues to get better. And in 2026, you just take an early look, it might be the top class that we see in the country. At least that's where it is trending. I believe they are actually a top 3 recruiting class in the country as we say right now, maybe even one. The last thing I'll say is player retention. Like, the people want to make a stink about relying on the transfer portal, which, one, I don't think is an accurate statement when you're talking about the Oregon Ducks. Number two, it's not coming at the expense of their roster. I mean, you look at the transfer portal additions they made, especially last year, like, it was long, a lot of really good players. They did not lose the players they didn't want to lose, which is a conversation that I think is important, right? You look at a team like Ole Miss, who uses the transfer portal a lot. They'll bring in some really good players, but they'll lose some really good players as well. I look at Oregon and say, yeah, we're doing really good work in the portal, but we're retaining the players we want to retain. That's another important conversation when you talk about talent acquisition. I guess here's my overall argument about talent acquisition for Oregon. They had a national championship caliber roster in 2024. They will have a national championship caliber roster in 2025. That's all that matters. You know, when you're evaluating talent acquisition, are you providing the adequate talent for your football team to give yourself a chance to win a national championship? Oregon is clearly doing that under Dan Lanning. Player development. This is probably the most interesting conversation that you can have with Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. And Dill, we went back and forth in terms of how are we going to evaluate, what do we want to talk about when we're talking about quote unquote player development. You said NFL draft picks. I don't hate that. Here's the thing. In 2024, 8 NFL draft picks is a very good number. You look at the projected numbers in 2025, that number is probably going to be 12 or 13. What's your take? Because a lot of these draft picks that we're talking about are transfer portal additions. What is your take in terms of player development for the Oregon Ducks under Dan Lanning?
I mean, simply put, this is the one probably question that's outstanding. And I don't think we have the answer. I do
I
think a
agree.
lot of people have kind of written it off. Oh, he just uses portal guys. And like you are seeing like those young defensive linemen, Mateo Yu, Tatum Tuioti, those guys took big steps. Jackson and Vetra at the linebacker spot, I thought played better football as the year went on, kind of became the guys, if you will. I look at the talent or player development, I should say. I think I still want to see it kind of answered fully. I'd like to see their
Yes.
offensive line develop at a higher level. I'd like to see them develop internally wide receivers at probably a little bit higher level. But I don't think it's a good question that's kind of been answered in the way a lot of people kind of want to say it's been answered, and that he can't do it or something.
Well, two things. One, when he just got to Oregon, there were a lot of moving parts. So the high school recruiting class weren't necessarily elite at first. Look, that 2024 and 2025 class, like, those guys are either coming in as true freshmen or just finished up their first year. You're going to see NFL draft picks, a lot more of those NFL draft picks come from the high school ranks. My second conversation with quote unquote player development is we act like transfer portal additions don't act like player or don't count as player development. Derek Harmon played his best football of his career with the Oregon Ducks in 2024. Jordan Birch went from a arguably 5-star bust to a guy that's going to be a top 50 pick in the NFL draft. Tez Johnson went from a not no-name wide receiver in Troy, but a wide receiver in Troy that not many people thought that highly of, to one of the best wide receivers that we saw in the country. Jordan James, Josh Connolly were high school guys recruited by Dan Lanning. Yes, the quote unquote pipeline from, hey, my high school class to the NFL draft hasn't fully developed yet. And I think that's more of a product of, hey, he's still going into year 4 as the Oregon Ducks head coach. But secondly, like, how are we not going to count guys like Jordan Birch, guys like Derek Carman, Tez Johnson, that, look, these guys were not NFL draft picks when they came to the transfer portal. Well, Derek Carman maybe was, but they all got better during their time at Oregon too. You can develop players that you get in the transfer portal as well. I guess that's a long way of what I was trying to say.
Yeah, but you still need to see. I mean, this year
I agree with you. Oh, yes, I agree.
Your high school guys get picked. Like, you want to see a couple juniors, I think, play good enough football where they're kind of ready to leave and hopefully be first rounders like that.
Kenny Sadiq going to be a first round pick, maybe. Mateo Yu, Tatum Tuioti.
They'll be in the conversation for sure. But like, yeah, that again, we need to see it. That's probably the one thing, and he hasn't really had a chance to prove it, as you said. He is going in year 4. But I think that's where I come with. Like, can this be a sustainable program? That question has to be answered, because I don't.
I'd see that. Can it be a sustainable program? It is sustainable. What do you mean? They're clearly getting better. It's sustainable.
No, I'm saying like sustain, like dominant. Like, we talk about him as a top 4 coach. If he's going to be like that type of team, like an Ohio State, a Georgia, a Texas, like that model of being able to bring in big time high school players and make them first round draft picks, that is the bedrock of what it has to be. And again, that hasn't quite been the case yet for this Oregon team.
Yeah, I guess where I'll end this discussion is that narrative is going to change. I bet my life on it. Bet a lot of money on it. That narrative around he can't develop his high school recruits to NFL draft picks, that is going to change starting in 2025.
Well, again, I'm not saying it's like a problem necessarily. It's like the same thing with Ryan Day, where they just, he's not a big game coach, he'll never win anything. Well, then when he was what he was. Like, he was a really, really good coach. He always put himself in position. In 24, he finally broke through and made it happen. Not saying Dan Lanning's not a guy who can develop high schoolers into big time first round draft picks consistently, but that is the one piece of the puzzle that I don't think we've totally answered.
Because I don't think he's had a chance to answer it yet. It's probably where I come from on that. Yeah. All right. Coaching staff. This is another sneaky, really, really strong part of where this Oregon program's at.
Especially on offense.
Yeah, that's loaded right now. Will Stein, look, I know that was a frustrating offensive performance to watch from the Oregon Ducks against Ohio State. One, that was a defense that was clearly playing at another level. This Oregon offense was clearly a top 10 offense, been a top 10 offense under Will Stein. Alik Terry, stud offensive line coach, in my opinion. I agree, maybe some development specifically from the tackles need to take place. He's a young offensive line coach that I think is clearly going in the right direction. Rashad Samples is getting head coaching interest. He's now going to interview with the Dallas Cowboys. Talk about a good hire. That's a sign of a good hire. The tight end coach, Drew, I think, is doing a great job. Here's the one question I'll ask you, Dill. Tosh Lupoy, how do you evaluate him as the DC for the Oregon Ducks? He's the only one where it's like, is that an elite coordinator that the Oregon Ducks have?
Yeah, I think it's fair to have some questions about what he's kind of done, because frankly, in big moments, their defense hasn't always played incredibly good. Like against those Washington games, not great defensive performances. Against Ohio State, you'd like to see, when your offense maybe doesn't come out firing immediately, you'd like to see your defense be competitive and keep you in a football game. That was very much not what Oregon.
And the frustrating part about that was it just felt like they were super underprepared. Like you look at how we talked about that game and what Ohio State was trying to do. It's almost like everybody in the country felt like they knew it was going to happen. And it's one thing to know what's going to happen. It's one thing to stop it. I get that. But it did seem like it was just a lack of preparation. After 4 weeks of off, to be unprepared for that football game schematically was really disappointing.
And you got to see pretty much Ohio State play Tennessee the exact same way they went.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
that was a huge problem.
This is a huge year for Tosh Lupoy. I think, because you look at Tosh Lupo is a very solid defensive coordinator. When you want to be a national championship caliber program, you have to have elite coordinators. Is Tosh Lupo that guy? We're going to find out in 2025. Last one to talk about trajectory. I don't know if there's much to talk about. You go back to the first slide. Like, they are clearly getting better under Dan Lanning. Consistent, steady improvement, as my dad would love to say. You are seeing that with Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks. The trajectory, like, Dill, we said this before the 2024 season, said, hey, if you could buy stock in a program, what program would you be buying stock in? Oregon. I still feel that way sitting here in January of
Yeah, you
2025.
certainly feel like they're about to put on a team that, yeah, it's like we talked about Alabama for a while under Saban, talked about Dabo for those years that he was really rolling, talk about Kirby Smart now and Ryan Day. Like, he feels like he's going to put this Oregon team year in and year
Yeah.
out in positions to win national
Which
championships. You see everything kind of cooking on this
you
program.
didn't get under Mario Cristobal. You would have, like, it felt like under Mario Cristobal, it was a tier below elite. You know, there were a bunch of elite perennial national championship contending teams, and then there were the Oregon Ducks, that tier below. It was not a bad program by any means, but it always felt like it was a tier below. Dan Lanning's putting this program in that spot where year after year after year, they're going to be in that top tier of college football. And again, to me, that's all you can ask for, is consistently competing for national championships. That's the standard with this Oregon Ducks team. State of the program, Dylan's damn good. And don't let one game in a big moment fool you. This team's going in the right direction, in my opinion. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Oregon fans, would love to hear how you guys are feeling in the comment section. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.